Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, if you are joining us from Montreal, and good evening if you are joining us from Israel, as our speaker and guest, Lilach Ben Zvi, is certainly doing. If you're joining us from Europe, also a very beautiful and nice October evening to you. I'm delighted to welcome you back to the Azrieli Institute of Israel Studies, unfortunately still only on screen, hopefully in the next semester, more and more often also back in our classrooms and in our lecture halls. My name is Csaba Nikolényi. I'm a professor of political science at Concordia University, and I also have the honor and the privilege to have directed the Azrieli Institute of Israel Studies for the past 10 years. This is a very important year for us. We have been alive and running for a decade, and it is in that spirit, in celebrating this important milestone, that we are trying to bring and share with you so many important views and interpretations of current, but also broader historical, cultural, political trends and processes in Israel, about Israel, and from Israel. And that is exactly what you are about to receive tonight or this afternoon. Lilach Ben Zvi is not only a current PhD student at the University of Haifa School of Political Science, she is also spending some time virtually as a visiting junior scholar with us at the Azrieli Institute of Israel Studies. I met Lilach about four years ago or so at one of the many conferences where we usually go together, and I was so impressed with her work, with her interpretation, and with her efforts at trying to understand important processes in Israeli political life and the political system by using Yeshayahu Leibowitz's very important theoretical and philosophical framework, amongst other things. There is no shortage to Lilach's range of interest, but that particularly is something that we shared in common and where we connected. So I was delighted when Lilach asked if she could spend some time with us at the Institute, and it's been just absolutely wonderful. Lilach's doctoral dissertation, and let me share the title with you, is about agreement and struggle in the regularization of community and state relationships. In addition to being a doctoral student in Israel at the University of Haifa, Lilach is also spending time as a research fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Yerushalayim. And of course, that institute has a very special Montreal connection. So Lilach, now your experience with us is adding yet another dimension to your deep connections with Montreal. And I really, really hope that soon you will also be able to join us in person, perhaps in the next semester or when your time permits. You are always a very welcome visitor and guest. So ladies and gentlemen, let me now make it my time to mute myself and turn the floor over to Lilach Ben Zvi, who is going to tell us about her interpretation of Israel after Shomer Homot, national struggles in Israel. Lilach, the screen and the floor is now yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Csaba. First, I have a presentation, so which is going to be with us all the time I'm speaking. So I want to share it when I will find it. I'm supposed to be able to do a share screen, but for some reason I can't find it. I will try again. This is the Zoom fault. I'm fine. Okay, now it's okay. Okay, so yeah, I wanted to say some things about myself, but Csaba already introduced me, so some of the things you already said. But yes, I recently finished a dissertation at the School of Political Science at Haifa University. It's still I still work. I send it to get judgment. I'm waiting for the judgment to come back. And my research belongs to political philosophy and deals with creating and maintaining civil consent in the modern state. I'm interested in how we can live together, and when our society is so pluralistic and divided, And when we do live together, what are the core values, if there is any, that hold our community together? And I wrote about civil consent, but my work is also related to Jewish studies and Israel studies. This is because I wrote about the Jewish and democratic state and focuses on the political thought of Yeshayahu Leibowitz. And Leibowitz was a Jewish thinker, a Jewish philosopher who passed away more than 25 years ago. He was born in Germany, but spent most of his life in Israel, in Jerusalem. And his political thought is basically a Jewish thought about Judaism and the Jewish people in the modern era and the state of Israel as a current Jewish state. And Leibowitz was not very interesting to find ways people can live peacefully together. You can say the opposite is true. He did not believe we could live together in harmony. He did not have a lot of faith in humanity. Also, Leibowitz did not deal with the general questions that thinkers also who deal with citizenship consent ask. But he did talk about it through his writing about the Jewish people and the Jewish state. And I thought it will be fascinating to take his specific work and to check whether we can say something, I can say something general about civil consent in a modern state. And in general, that is what I try to do in my dissertation. I think this is very interesting. Obviously, I wrote it. Now there is more than one issue Leibowitz refers to, which I am referring to in my work. And the biggest one, I think, is religion and state. But he also talks about nationalism in the modern state. And he's talking about Israel, but in political philosophy, nationalism is an important issue when trying to say something about civil consent. You have to address this. The fact that not all citizens are necessarily from the same nation, that there are national minorities in a lot of democracies, and you need to talk about the fundamental values that constitute civil consent while taking into account that nationalism is a big part of that consent, and that you have citizens, it is a big issue for them. So in this lecture, I will use Leibowitz's concept of nationalism to talk about Shomer Homot and the events during this operation in Israel. And my main question is, what makes the events during Shomer Homot unique in comparison to other events related to the Israeli-Palestine conflict? And the title is After Shomer Homot. First, because I saw, although I will focus on what happened during the operation, I thought about the implication and even the explanation only afterward. And second, I will try to say something about the reality in Israel today. So this is basically, this is Shomer Homot. This is how it's look like. And Shomer Homot started, you can say, on May the 10th, which was Jerusalem Day, Yom Yerushalayim. This is the day of celebrating the liberation of the old city in 1967, the Six-Day War. And every year on Jerusalem Day, you have a lot of people coming to Jerusalem and the old city, especially teenagers. And when I was in high school, I came every year to Jerusalem, to the Kotel. And this is quite an event. Very crowded, everybody were white and blue dancing in the street and singing. So obviously it was more restricted during the last 2 years because of COVID, but it is a real experience. And this is basically how it's looked like on Jerusalem Day. This is the Mitzad Galim, the parade of flags. And I don't know if you can see, but most of the participants are from the Tzionut Datit, religious Zionism, which I'm also proud of. And there were, and there is, disputes on the last few years about where exactly can you go during this celebration? Like, can you go into the Muslim quarter in the old city? And especially, can you get into Har Bayit, Temple Mountain? And this is a big dispute in Israel, even inside the religious Zionism, whether or not you ascend the Temple Mountain. Now, I don't want to elaborate too much about it, but this is a religious and political disagreement in Israel. And during Jerusalem Day, a lot of Jews usually go into Har Bayit. And this year, things escalated to the point that Hamas put an ultimatum to the state of Israel, saying, suppose Israel is not going to back down its forces from both Temple Mountain and Sheikh Jarrah, which is a neighborhood in East Jerusalem, which is also in disputed regarding territory. So until 6 p.m., if not, Hamas will fire rockets. So this is the place. This is Temple Mountain, Har Bayit, and Sheikh Jarrah, all in Jerusalem. And Israel obviously rejected the ultimatum, and in 6 and 2 minutes, Hamas fired rockets toward Jerusalem, which was an unusual thing because Hamas is fired all the time, but not toward Jerusalem. And Hamas knew, obviously, this was going to be a big deal, and he was not wrong. You can see what happened. Immediately, people ran away, try to find places to hide. On the right, you can see this is the Knesset. This is the Israeli parliament because it's also in Jerusalem, and they had to be evacuated. So that was a big deal. And from that moment, IDF attacked Gaza, Hamas fired back, and we started another confrontation, another operation, which got the name Shomer Homot. This is on the right, it is Gaza, and on the left, this is Kippat Barzel, if I'm not mistaken. This is a famous picture from the operation. And the name Shomer Homot means the guardians of the walls, which refer to Jerusalem's walls. And this is also a famous Israeli song, Shomer Homot, about an IDF soldier standing on the walls of Jerusalem and watching the city. In ceremonies, in schools, kids are singing the song. So the content is obvious to everybody. And so far, this is bad. So many of the citizens in Israel has to go to the shelters. But it is not new or unusual because every couple of years, something like that happens. And if you live like in Otef Aza, the cities surrounding Gaza Strip, this is your daily routine. I'm not saying it should be, but this is not new. But what was different during this operation, serious riots accompanied the war in Gaza by Israeli Arabs who live in Israel and protesting the events. That also is not so unusual to the situation. What was different this time, the scope and power of these riots, but mainly the reaction of the state of Israel to it. And the main place where these riots took place was mixed cities. These are cities when Jews and Arabs live together. And two main cities where everything happened are Lod and Akko. Okay, you can see we have Akko in the north, we have Lod in the center of Israel. Now, I'm not going to get into the history of these cities because we have no time. Some people will say that usually Jews and Arabs live in coexistence in these cities, in these mixed cities. Some people said that was never the case, but the fact is that during Shomer Homot, there were severe riots in both Lod and Akko. Now, I think a full disclosure is needed here. The way I'm telling this story is from my perspective, the way I understand and interpret what happened. And you should know that this is not the only voice you may hear in Israel regarding the riots during Shomer Homot. There are other voices, and there is a disagreement around what happened and what is that means. Now, I wish I could say there is no dispute around the facts. And fortunately, there is. I cannot explain why, because to me, it's very clear what happened. In Lod on May the 10th, Israeli Arabs, citizens of Lod, rioted, threw stones and Molotov cocktails, destroyed city security cameras, set cars on fire, put in fire the Talmud Torah of the city, Bet Midrash, and a synagogue. Also, they changed the Israeli flag with the Palestinian flag. And at some point, a Jew citizen who tried to protect himself because he called the police and the police didn't come and he didn't know what to do. And he had a gun and he shot and killed one of them. Of course, he didn't want to, but he was protecting himself. And from that second, you can say the door of hell opened in Lod, and the riots and chaos in the city were unbelievable. People could not leave their homes, and rioters set citizens' apartments on fire. This is Jew citizens who escaped from the city, so when they come back, they have no apartment. And basically, in general, this is how it's looked like in Lod during these days. And who is not in Lod when all of this happening? The police are almost totally absent during all of this anarchy. And the residents of Lod called and begged, but almost no one came. And when police did come, they didn't do what they needed to do. There were long hours that no one came to help, no one came to stop the chaos in the city. And the residents of Lod wrote on social media describing how they were left alone. I like Twitter because it is short. So this is the mayor of Lod, this is Yair Revivo, and he's writing on these days, this is an emergency, we are in an emergency, I'm calling the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Benny Gantz to declare about a lockdown on Lod, and we have lives in danger and people may die tonight if the government won't put a lockdown on the city this coming hour, and we need police forces and army forces, they need to come and they need to do it. And this is someone who is saying, hello, police, Lod is on fire, wake up. And this is like a joke. This is like a joke. Someone is saying, what is the Lod, how the search of Lod's residents look like in the internet? What are they searching for? One, how a police look like. Two, how to stay alive. And this is a caricature that also was famous in these days. You can see a policeman that holding someone and he's reporting, I stopped the riot, the rioter, and the man is holding him, saying to him, watch out, be careful, because behind him, he has a lot of rioters who is doing basically whatever they want, but the policeman is holding let's say the Jew side of the here and not doing anything to stop the rioters. So I focused on Lod because it was the most critical case, but similar events happen in Akko. And in the end, after a few days, if we put aside the property damage and only focuses on the main event, so we have, this is Aviel Ben Yoshua, he was beaten to death in Lod with stones. This is Aviel Evans. He was one of the Israel aerospace industry's top executives, director of the Israel Space Agency during the 90s. He was a colonel in the IDF and a winner of the Israel Security Award. He was hurt when rioters set up on fire a hotel in Akko, and he passed away 3 weeks later. And this is Lilach Ben Zvi, he's still alive. He was a teacher from Akko who went to watch his students during the protest against the riots. He wanted to make sure everything is okay, and he was beaten almost to death in his head by rioters. You can see that. And he was in critical condition. He lost his ability to talk properly, and he's still in recovery. I think he's about my age, something like that. And this is the main stories. There is more. And I live in Haifa, and Haifa is also a mixed city. And what happened in Haifa during these days? There is a picture, you can see a picture from what happened these days. This is from, we call this, this is downtown, called the Moshava Germanit, is a famous place in Haifa. But it was not like Akko and Lod in Haifa. Definitely not, but it was not quiet. And there were some riots, especially downtown, but it was less dangerous. And one of the nights, my husband was asked to come and help our friends, residents of Haifa who lives downtown. They were told there is a need to watch the synagogue because the community members worried it might be set on fire. And we knew it happened in Lod. So we had to decide what to do. And it was a bizarre moment, like, is this really happening? We need to watch a synagogue in the state of Israel. But we felt that setting a synagogue on fire is not something we can ignore. So this is a red line for us. So we decided my husband would go. Someone came to pick him up because it was dangerous to go alone. And also there was a chance the car would set on fire. So I told him, okay, I'll call you from time to time and you better answer. And this is what happened. He went And after an hour and a half, he called and said, we are coming back. Police is here. Everything's quiet. And that was it. And before we went, I told him, be careful from the rioters, of course, but also be careful not to get into any confrontation with the police. I told him the police wouldn't help. They won't be on your side, and be careful, you can get arrested, and this is very serious. If someone gets criminal records, it can ruin your career, your job, and nobody wants that. But that was not the reality in Haifa. Police came and helped, and everything was fine. But I stayed with a strong feeling I could not explain, and also I could not shake off for a couple of days. And eventually I realized that what I feel is anger. I was angry at my state that enabled this situation in which I felt nobody would help. And I was furious about what happened to the people at Lod and Akko. And I admit that the fact many of them are religious Zionism made me look at each of them, their injuries, their fear, their children, and see myself and my family. And beside being mad, which did not help very much, I started to think about everything from a research point of view. Why am I so angry? Like, what happened? And although it is upsetting from a personal perspective, it is interesting from an academic point of view. Does Leibowitz refer to this situation I described at Shomer Homot? Not exactly, but I think we can look at some division Leibowitz makes in his theory and learn more about this situation in Shomer Homot. In Leibowitz's political theory, there is an interesting division regarding nationalism. As I said at the beginning, you have to deal with nationality and nationalism when dealing with civil consent. However, some thinkers, mostly liberal thinkers, don't want to do that. They don't think there is a good way for nationalism to meet with liberalism, democracy, human rights, with the ideas you want a modern state to be guided by. And liberal thinkers want the modern state to treat all citizens equally, to base a consensus around universal values, and they honestly don't know what to do with nationalism. They can see it is important, very important to people, but can it be a part of civil consent, to base civil consent on national affiliation, to say it has an ethical meaning? That doesn't feel right to many modern thinkers dealing with citizenship. Now, Leibowitz was not an active part of such a debate. He wrote mainly about the state of Israel, which did precisely that. Israel declared itself as a Jewish and democratic state, as the homeland of the Jewish people. And this is taking nationalism and liberalism, because when you have democracy, you have some form of liberalism, liberal rights, something. To take liberalism and nationalism, universalism and particularism, and to put them together. And until this day, in Israel studies and Jewish studies, you have a big discourse regarding the relationship between Jewish and democracy, liberalism and Judaism. Can they live together? Does that make any sense? And this discourse is coming partly from this problem with nationalism. And Leibowitz says something like, yeah, don't bother yourself, because nationalism is essential, but it is not a value. It is just a human need, an essential one, but nothing more than that. And regarding Judaism, well, for him, Judaism is solely Torah and mitzvot. And since Israel is a modern secular state, it is a democracy. So I'm not even sure that Leibowitz saying there is a Jewish people anymore. So that's fine. Judaism is a value, but the modern era kind of ruins it. And nationalism is just a human need. What bothered him was when people try to mix them. When people claim that Judaism today can be expressed in the Jewish state. I mean, the Jewish people are the ones who live in the Jewish state. Let's make Zionism the new value of the Jewish people. That Leibowitz did not like at all, because to him that was fascism, which is the most wicked thing in the world. Now, I will be happy to elaborate more about that if someone wants me, I can say that as a religious Zionist myself, I do not accept his approach, but I still think it is fascinating, and more important than that, I believe that Leibowitz's attitude toward nationalism hides a significant division between national-based and value-based struggle. Because Leibowitz says that you have two kinds of struggles in any state. By saying, Leibowitz says, he doesn't say that directly. I looked and searched in his work, and then I took out what I believe is this division. So you have value-based struggles, and which is struggles regarding values, their importance, their place in the political sphere, and the possible place they can catch in any civil consent. Let's think about any debate which going on in the modern state. I will take Israel as an example. In Israel, you can find discussion regarding religion and state, the right economic concept, LGBT rights, women rights, the environment. COVID, in some way, is a struggle regarding the priority of rights. It should be at least. All of this is our struggles regarding the way we as citizens prioritize our values. And not at home. At home, you do almost whatever you want. But outside, we fight about the shape of the public sphere, our public sphere. And every one of us desires his dear values to get a good place in the civil consent. We want recognition, and we want to feel that the public sphere express our values. It is important for us as citizens. And Leibowitz says about this conflict, you will never be able to set an agreement about values. Because in the modern era, when you have pluralism, that's not possible to agree about values. What should we do? For sure not compromise. Compromise over values makes them worthless. No, we should fight. We should make sure we keep these struggles over values and have a vital public sphere when citizens can debate properly. And in the modern era, these fights, and only these fights, keep our values alive and vital with meaning. Now that is a radical concept about citizenship, to say there will be no agreement. But still, I think Leibowitz did capture the public sphere and the modern civic identity in a very accurate way in his idea about value-based struggles. So what is a national-based struggles? This is exactly the opposite. A national-based struggle is not a fight about a value, but about a human need, about national independence. And this is not a value, according to Leibowitz. This is a natural struggle of a nation to have its own state. Sometimes this struggle ended, meaning the nation established itself as a state. The Jewish people did it in 1948, but sometimes 1948. But sometimes a nation cannot succeed. What happened in that case? Well, that depends. Maybe the nation will spread and stop existing. Perhaps it will become a national minority in another state. And maybe there will be a different solution in the future. One state, two nations, two states for two nations. But right now, there is no solution. And in the Israeli-Palestine conflict, this is the case. You have a group, Leibowitz claims, who wants a state of their own, and they don't have one. And what does that mean? It means this minority has to live in a political sphere it doesn't accept. The Arabs reject the political sphere, which is the Jewish and democratic state. Can you blame them, according to Leibowitz? No. And can you blame the Zionists to establish a Jewish state? Again, no. This is a human need. It's not a value. And where's the catch? Leibowitz points on two important notes. One is a failure in the national struggle doesn't change the way a nation feels. It will still want and desire national independence. This is the way Leibowitz described his attitude toward Zionism. He's saying, I am one of the Jews that wanted and still want national political independence for the Jewish people. This is the way he speaks, I want. And like I want, almost any nation wants. They cannot have, okay, they will still want. And that means they will probably never take part in the existing public sphere because it is not theirs. So the chance the Israeli Arabs will take part in the public life in Israel is not big. That is also preventing them from making any value-based struggles because they don't have a political sphere to manage value-based struggle there. And they don't have a state. So it is hard and almost impossible for national minorities to take part in public life and shape civil consent because they don't accept the political sphere. And we can see that when Leibowitz is talking about what is Zionism. Zionism is the tendency and action directed at achieving state national independence of the Jewish people on their land. This is, according to Leibowitz, this is Zionism, and he is adding to that. This Zionism is common to both Gush Emunim and Shalom Achshav, and it's common to both Arik Sharon and the Shomer Hatzair. And it is only this tendency that they hold in common. And aside from this tendency, there is nothing that connects Gush Emunim and Shalom Achshav or Arik Sharon and the Shomer Hatzair. Zionism is a political issue and not one of believing values. Because Leibowitz is trying to say something like bad in this here. He's saying, don't think we have something in common regarding to values. We don't have all Zionist people. The only thing we have in common is a human need. We all want an independence for the Jewish people. And that's it. But the thing is, that's it. It is a lot. It means that all Zionist people, all the people here, which are Zionists, the Jewish people here, have in common something very big, which is the political sphere. They are all accept and in some way endorse the political sphere, which is the Jewish and democratic state, even if they don't have anything else in common. This is a lot. And if you are a national minority, you don't have that. And this is the second point that leads to the second point. Your responsibility is on the state. The state should do what it can do to ensure minorities have rights. And this is the minimum it can do for a group of people without a political sphere. Now, if we come back to Shomer Homot, can this division between national-based fights and value-based fights explain what made me so angry? And it fails. At first, we might say no, because this is pretty obvious that the riots were an expression of a national fight. Does that make it okay? Can I justify the rioters' actions saying they express a human need, a desire for national independence? I'm going to say big no to that. No, you cannot do that and then say, well, I am a national minority. It's tough for me that you have a state and I am not. And there are people in Israel who did say such things like, maybe we should contain such a behavior until a specific point, only damage to property, but not to humans, and something like that. We need to understand that this is not my view. I do not accept that, and I can gladly elaborate, of course, but I don't think that is the point. I don't think that is the case. I was not angry about the rioters. I have strong feelings about them, of course, but my state was the one I was mad about. And why? Because what my state did, what the state of Israel did, don't make any sense. When Leibowitz talks about the state responsibility to keep the Arabs right, was he meant that the state could ignore riots against Jewish citizens because whoever did them is a national minority? I don't think so. One of the main, if not the first job of a state is to secure its citizens. You have debates between thinkers about how much power a state should have. Should it be responsible for education, health, welfare, or only security? Security is the minimum. There is not a thinker saying that the state will provide you welfare, but when it comes to security, yeah, that's your problem. And when Leibowitz talked about national struggles, it didn't mean that the existing state should give up freely. Maybe he would say that may happen to you. It will be hard to protect citizens when there is a national conflict in a state. It is hard for everyone, Jews and Arabs, to manage a life like that. But voluntarily to give up on citizens' rights and security when they are begging the state to come. to do its job. That, to me, is inconceivable. And in my research, I always thought that the contradiction is between democracy and nationalism. You have a nation that wants a state of its own, the Jewish people, and needed to be a democracy. We want a democracy, I think, in Israel. So you have to make sure you keep all citizens' rights, including minorities. Of course, you have to. I didn't think that the solution for this contradiction could be that the state won't give up on democracy, it will give up of being a state. And that is, in my opinion, what happened in Shomer Homot. There was not a state in Lod and Akko, and also other places for a good couple of days. And so people needed to manage the situation by themselves when they are clearly not supposed to do that. And now, is this the first time something like that is happening? Is this such a unique situation? I'm guessing not. More places feel there is no police. The greatest example in Israel is the South, Hadrom, when you have large areas with massive crime and no policing. And so this is not new. But the riots in Shomer Homot were unique in their power and scope. It was like, I don't know, state of nature on speeds. It was like a jungle. It was crazy. A few horrible days. And more than that, it felt like a national humiliation. During Shomer Homot, IDF soldiers were ordered not to wear uniforms some places, like on some roads, because it can create riots. This was new. And again, it created the feeling you cannot find your own state. And also, the riots got the nickname pogrom. A pogrom, you can hear the name regarding Shomer Homot, Praot Tashpa. Tashpa was the Hebrew year last year. This corresponds with past events in Jewish history, like Praot Arpat or Tach V'Tach. Locate the riots in the same place with pogroms from the past, saying this is another one. And this is a unique sense. A pogrom usually refers to events outside the state of Israel, like anti-Semitism events around the world, or events that happened before 1948, before the establishment of the state. Calling the riots praot reflect how people feel about them. Again, the Jews left alone. Now, it is not the same as the pogroms down in Jewish history. I think everybody is aware of that. It is not the same, but it feels like the same. Last thing I want to address is the situation today. What is the current situation in the mixed cities? There are still events in Lod and Akko, like daily events. The scope is much smaller, but the situation is not as before. From time to time, we can hear about stones, shots, vandalism, fear to walk at night, fear to let kids walk alone. This is the new routine of the mixed cities, like Lod, Akko. We can also mention Ramle, which is a mixed city next to Lod. It was not so quiet before, but now it is much worse. The riots deepened the split in the Israeli society. The dispute around what happened during Shomer Homot and who is responsible is continuing, and questions like who is the one to blame for what happened, who started, how many sides there are. These questions are often heard and debated in the public sphere, on social media, and also the Knesset. We can say the events during Shomer Homot deepened gaps in the Israeli society between religious Zionism and those who see them as responsible for the tension in the mixed cities, and in some way to what happened to themselves. Accusation like, you took budget from the Israeli Arabs in the mixed cities, you took over and pushed Arabs away, you didn't come here for peace, you are settlers, mitnachalim, like any insult. So there is a very ugly discourse that I wish I could say it is a new value-based struggle, but it is mainly just people insulting each other on social media. So we can say that the national struggle is also getting in the way of the majority to manage value-based struggle. when you have a national struggle in the state, even if it's not your struggle. It affects everything and everyone, and even everything is getting so tense. So I think the debate in Israel today is very hard to manage, and it is a very ugly one. Another thing is that since the riots, the violence in the Arab society has increased. After the riots, it seems that the Israeli Arabs' condition got worse regarding violence incidents inside the Arab society. The situation since Shomer Homot became unbearable. We are talking about more than 100 people who got murdered, Israeli Arabs, who got murdered in incidents, especially inside Arab cities. And the police are having a tough time dealing with this. The encounter between the Israeli Arabs and the Israeli police is very tense. Even when police want to help, it lacks the tools to deal with this situation of a national minority who doesn't count on it. Because as Leibowitz explained, this is not their police. The Israeli Arabs don't trust the Israeli police. Even most of the representatives of the Israeli Arabs in the Knesset are against letting the Israeli police get into the Arab cities, like putting a police station there. Even that is not something you can always do. And society deals with illegal weapon. It is a big issue these days, and Israeli police and the government are thinking about what can we do. There is no easy solution. And also there is a new slogan on these days, or I don't know, the last couple of weeks, Arabs' lives matter. That has become spread in social media, but it seems that only makes it more confusing, like to whom it is addressed. Who is responsible for this situation? Who doesn't care about Arabs' life? It seems that the state of Israel is having a really hard time with this problem because it deals with a community which doesn't acknowledge it. And the Arab community needs to get help, but they need to get help from a community, from a state that is foreign to them. Maybe we can say that. And you can see that in the case of the Jewish majority, even when there is a situation you feel like you cannot trust the police, if you as a Jew feel you cannot trust the police, this is much easier to fix. Like in the case of Lod and Akko, they felt like police is not coming and they cannot trust them. But we can see down in Shomer Homot, there is a big effort to make peace or to make a reconciliation between the police forces and the Akko and Lod residents. Like last holiday, which was Simchat Torah, we had a picture in Lod with police forces dancing in Lod with Sifrei Torah. And there was a saying that we are, I don't know if peace, because there was no war, but we're trying to work together, we're trying to make a solution, and it's much easier to the majority in Israel to do that. First, because in the case you have a holiday you all celebrate, or you have values you all believe in. But even if you're not, you have a political sphere you all accept and endorse. And in this, so it is much easier to accept or to reconcile situation. But when it is a national minority, it is much harder. And also the riots emphasize the difficulty of the modern state in dealing with national-based struggles. We can see this difficulty in the state's tendency, Israel, state's tendency for mitigating punishment for rioters from Shomer Homot. The court is going easy with people involved in severe events, giving them funny sentences and sometimes setting them free on the arguments that the riots is over and that the situation today is calm. You know, in Hebrew, we say, Ashrei Hamamin, if you believe that, okay, but that, again, we can use Leibowitz to explain that. When it comes to national struggles, the state will face a hard time balancing between keeping the state of Israel as a Jewish state and a democratic one, who needs to keep its national minorities right. Still, why is the solution of Israel giving up its sovereignty and stopping doing its job to provide security of all citizens, because everybody suffers from this tension, from this decision. Jews and Arabs, this is my claim. And I can think about some explanation, although I'm not sure, and I can elaborate. But one thing for sure is that the decision of the state of Israel not to be a state sometimes is not going to solve any national struggles, only the opposite, I believe. Zeu, that's it.
Lilach, thank you so much for this eloquent, insightful, detailed analysis of the situation, of a very important situation in Israel, using a very beautifully laid out political theoretical framework. The floor, so to speak, or rather the screen or the chat box is now open for members of the audience to place their questions. And while our friends are gathering their thoughts and questions to put to you, I would like to maybe generate a couple of ideas, some food for thought. And maybe I'm going to fire away the first couple of questions. And again, there's an open invitation. We have about 20 minutes.
Yeah, I can see questions already.
Great, great, wonderful. So, but I will still monopolize the floor just for a couple of minutes by challenging you to the following quick questions. Lilach, you highlighted the contrast between Lod and Akko on the one hand and Haifa. Your husband went out and then came back. So the sweeping explanation you gave should have led to similar observations in all the mixed cities, but clearly something worked in Haifa better. Something didn't break down to the same extent. So what's your theory, or yours, or how would Leibowitz help us understand why Haifa worked better, if I may say so, than the cases of Lod and Akko? Related question is the political moment. As Philip mentioned in our impromptu conversation leading up to your seminar, Shomer Homot and everything that followed thereafter caught Israel at a very unusual, really unusual, unprecedented moment in its political history. I mean, yes, there was a government, but really a government without an electoral political mandate. And the unresolved crisis of governability, government formation and durability was still haunting the nation. How does that factor into your analysis? So that's one. And finally, again, bringing it up to date, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about what Leibowitz would say about the fact that Mansour Abbas and Ram actually are joining the coalition. Is that turning Leibowitz's or your application of Leibowitz on its head? Because here we have a representative group, a party that clearly speaks for a segment of the Israeli Arab community, joining that political sphere that Leibowitz would say is really not theirs. Take it or leave it. You don't have to answer, of course, any of them. They may be completely irrelevant, but an open invitation. And then, of course, I'm going to read the questions as they are coming into the chat.
Okay, I will try to say something about each of the questions. Regarding the fact why Haifa was not. You can see that even before Shomer Homot, the tension in Akko and Lod was always much higher. First, I think you have much more confrontation than you have less Arabs population in Haifa, I think. But, you know, when talking about Haifa, usually people talking about Haifa as a coexistence place, there are less confrontation. Now, you can ask why there is more confrontation in Lod and Akko, and obviously people will give you different explanations. Some people saying that this is the religious Zionism fault, but I think it doesn't matter what the question in Israel is. There is always someone who is saying this is religious Zionism fault, but the nature of the city in Akko and Lod is always more tense. They're like an illegal weapon in Lod and Ramle, which is next to Lod, always much worse than in Haifa. Maybe we can say that the economy in Haifa is better, I think, but I'm not sure I can say that. Haifa is a very large city. And another thing I can tell you, because I know it, this is behind the scenes, after Shomer Homot, or after a couple of days, I don't remember, I talked with families from there, and I wanted to understand what happened. And they told me they knew people from the police, and they make sure police will come. Not because police, I have to say something about the police because I feel bad. I don't think the police in Israel didn't want to come to Lod and Akko. I think this is, like you said, this is government, this is coming from up. There is no police like, we don't want to come. But there were people in Haifa that was able to make the situation like that riots started to happen and they would manage to stop them. This, with the fact that Haifa was always less, problematic, I think create the fact that we saw what happened in Akko and Lod, which was like a surprise, and we ran downtown to stop it. But I'm not sure it would get so worse, although there were, shots or stones. There were people got injuries in Haifa, so it was not so quiet. But you cannot compare this to Lod and Akko. About the what happened in the government, the politics in Israel, I really think this is bigger than that. I think that the fact that we have no government may be a good excuse for people, to say, I could not do anything because it was an election and I didn't have the mandate to do it. I think this is, how do you say talichim? Just forget, I will, we've been going on years, since I think Mehumot October, since then you have processes that put you in this place. The fact that there was no government only make it worse, like it was in anything. But if Shomer Homot was in Bennett time, I'm not sure it was so different. I'm not sure. I don't even think it was worse, although I'm not sure. Regarding Mansour Abbas, I think Leibowitz would say that is great because, he wanted to see the Arabs are getting equal rights and stuff, and to see them in the government. Great, why not? Because if nationalism is a human need, there is no problem for him that the Arab representatives will be in the government, and you can have a Jewish state which have minority rights in the government. I think I can say that also. You can have. The question is, what does that mean, and an implication and things like that. But in general, I think he would say that is great.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lilach. I don't see the question in the chat that you mentioned.
I can see them because it was directed to me.
Yeah. So
I have a question from Philip. How does the leadership explain withholding police service? Are they not concerned that citizens will want to acquire firearms to protect themselves in such a situation? And can more Arabs not be recruited into the police force? Regarding the first question, so this is part of the disputes, because you can hear the leadership saying we are doing everything we can, and we don't have enough, like there was a saying that police didn't have enough forces to go there. And I can understand that, but I can tell you a story that a couple of weeks or a couple of months after or before Shomer Homot, I really don't remember, we were in quarantine, in isolation, because one of my kids met at school, COVID and stuff. And my kids took their phone, and this is very basic phone, and they pressed by accident on 9. And if you press 9, it calls like 911, it calls the police. And they didn't answer because they was playing, and my husband was getting a phone call like in seconds, telling to him, hello, we got a phone call from your house, from your kids, and we check and say, oh, so sorry, it was a mistake. And they say, no, we don't care, we are sending, we're sending a car to check if you are okay, if everything is fine. And we told them, yeah, you can come, but we are in isolation. So they say, yeah, okay, we will check it because we are on our way to you. And in a couple of minutes, they talked with us, they understood it was a mistake, so they went away. So I say they have enough forces to come and check how a family is doing, because the kids just press 9, which is important. I'm not saying it's not, but they cannot deal with such a big deal, such a big riots. I'm not buying it, although I understand if everything is going on the same second, I can understand that. But it's like, it's not only they didn't come. When they did come, there are stories that they didn't do almost nothing, because it's like our hands are tied. We cannot do. We can see they didn't know what to do. They didn't want to fire on rioters. Sorry, they didn't want to do that. And there are stories that they needed the help of the residents. And you cannot say the policemen are coward or not well trained. This is not true. There is a problem, like someone doesn't know how to deal with. And when they did come, sometimes like what I saw in the caricature, they took the weapons from the Jews. If you're a Jew resident living in Lod and Akko, there is a good chance your weapon will take away. Like, this is the easy solution. Also, the chief of the police was saying on May 18 that police will do justice with all the terrorists from both sides. This was a quote. And that make everyone, a lot of people, me included, very angry, like portraying that like there are two sides, but this is another way of dealing with that. And can more arms recruited into the police forces? This is, I so endorse that. And I think there are programs to do that, to recruit people from the national minority, from the Arabs to go to the police. Maybe not enough, but I'm sure you have Arabs, Israeli Arabs in the police. You have, maybe not enough, but it is certainly a solution that people are, the government, the police is trying. Yes.
Thank you very much, Lilach. And thank you, Philip, for that very important question, very insightful question. Any other questions? I don't see, Philip, you're raising your hand. So we are a very intimate group. Yes, so just go ahead. You don't have to talk.
A comment with respect to Haifa and the relationships between Jews and Arabs. My wife was born, Tamara was born in Haifa. We still have family in Haifa. And until I forget what the event was, maybe it was the Lebanon incursion, the relationships between the Jews and the Arabs in Haifa was pretty good. It was pretty good. And this goes back to before state days, that the relationships in Haifa were generally good between the Jews and the Arabs. And maybe some of this feeling carried on to now. And that's why the situation was able to be brought under control in Haifa, whereas not in Lod, for instance.
Thank you, Philip. You're absolutely right. Yes, Lilach.
Yeah, first, of course, it may explain that, of course, although I may say that after what happened, you can hear people in Lod saying they were shocked to see people they thought they have good relationship with them, their neighbors, who didn't help and even do, participate in what happened. But you cannot say it's not related. It is, of course. If you have good relationship, it may increase, I believe, it can increase the situation when it will be more quiet, but we can hear about other places when they are claiming they have good relationship and they don't understand why it happened.
Since I don't see any other questions coming in, I am going to take a moment to ask one closing question, if I may. And following up on Philip's comment, which asked you, Lilach, to look into the past and try to relate the past of the history and of the relationship of the two communities in Haifa to understanding today, I would like to ask you to look into the future. So if you had a crystal ball, and if we had Lilach's crystal ball with us, what do you see in the mixed cities down the road? Give yourself any length of time. Look into that crystal ball 5-10 years from now. Are we going to look back at the events of after Shomer Homot as an isolated hiccup in the challenging, dynamically unfolding history of Israel? Or is it going to be a game changer? Are things going to be different after this?
I don't want to be negative. I really don't. But I do think this is a game changer. I think because we can see this was not an event that happened and then fade away. It is still going on. Mm-hmm. And I don't see that the state of Israel, and more specifically the government, is doing enough to stop this. And in order to make, coexistence and to live together, you need a state. This is like what I think the main thing I try to say. It doesn't matter how you see the conflict between Israel and the Palestinian. I don't think it's matter. If there is a state here, it needs to show up when there is a problem. Now, I understand it's hard for the state and the government. I do understand. I don't need to get such hard decision. But I believe that it will happen again and again and again. Maybe it's like, in Gaza, when it was the first time there were rockets, everyone was, wow. And now it is the daily routine in Sderot and in Gaza, and like nobody cares anymore. And the government of Israel decided we need to live with it. And I think the government is deciding that we need to live also with rioters from time to time, we need to live with it. And unless the government will decide it's going in a different way, it will continue.
I'm making a note in my calendar to call you 5 years from now, so that we would look into the crystal ball together and see whether your prediction was right or not. But thank you for that very...
I hope I'm wrong.
I know, I understand. And the sincerity of your searching was so very beautifully shown. I'm going to give the last closing comment to Philip. Philip, please.
Yes, I would offer another view of the future, but it's contingent. I believe that if the government survives the budget vote and gets another 2 years at least, there's a good chance that it will be able to deal with all of this because it has the Ram party as part of it. And the Ram party, in my view, is asking mainly for all of the right things and what is necessary. And hopefully that will be the game changer and will diffuse situations in the future. Otherwise, if for some reason the government falls, I'm afraid I'm going to have to agree with Lilach. And I thank you very much, Lilach.
This is very interesting. Lilach, while you were showing the screens and you showed that very telling flyer or poster about Arab Lives Matter. There was a very interesting point there, precisely about the taqsib, about the budget that Philip was talking about, and suggesting that where the politicians are debating about the budget, and look what's happening in the meantime. So I think there is there is something suggesting that both of you are correct, which is what a nice way of actually ending perhaps this discussion.
I can tell you I'm not a big fan of the government right now, but if it will focus on that, that will be great. And I think any government, from the left, from the right, any government should prioritize that, because this is very, very important. This is a big problem in Israel right now. This is like people are going to a wedding and they are not coming back. This is insane.
Yeah.
Lilach, thank you. You've been wonderful. Thank you for sharing with so much discipline and erudition your thoughts about something so difficult. It was really palpable to see the conflict of thoughts and reflections on difficult personal reflections, but also national reflections and scholarly reflections. So thank you for doing that. Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you also for joining us, lending us your support. This is so important for us here at the Azrieli Institute of Israel Studies. We are so passionate about studying, researching, and teaching Israel, but of course, your interest and your engagement gives us even more motivation. Please join us again. Our next event is only a week away. On October 26th, we will be celebrating a book launch virtually, an important new book by Dr. Rachel Blumenthal, also a young scholar from Israel. Rachel's book is about the history of the Claims Conference, looking into a very different Israeli history, no less thought-provoking. And we will be joined at that event by two very noted scholars of German-Jewish relations, German-Israeli relations, Dr. Michael Brenner and Dr. Noam Zadov. So please join us on October 26th. And for future programs and events, please keep reading our newsletter or check out our updates on social media or on the website of the Azrieli Institute of Israel Studies. Before wishing you a beautiful rest of the day or an evening to you, Lilach, I would like to publicly acknowledge and thank our assistant and our communications and social media coordinator at the Institute, Lisa Komlos, a former graduate of the Israel Studies minor in our program, who has been working magic in getting the information to you and really to the rest of the world. So thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Lilach, for bringing your wisdom to us. Bye, everyone. See you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.